The objective here is to read through the NIST Special Publication 800-53, to read through the controls and objectives of this publication. To do that, I went to this link right here, then copy and pasted everything into a Google Doc so that I can go ahead and paste pictures in and make comments throughout it. Now this is going to be very difficult to read, and there's 360 pages after I pasted it in here. But if you look at the format they provide here on this website, if you go to nvd.nist.gov/800-53, there are quite a few resources here and links for you to click. You can look at the controls for just low impact things. And reading through these tables is interesting, but I think the way I did it with just a copy and paste over gave me the best chance to really manipulate the information there and make it more digestible to myself. But definitely use the other links because the formats are just another way for you to internalize this information yourself. Sometimes the links look really crazy like this, but if you zoom out enough, it kind of starts to make sense. But we're looking at a ton of access control controls. Then there's audit and accountability controls, awareness and training, security assessment and authorization, contingency planning. Every time you see the two-letter acronym, though, it usually is referring to a type of control. And each of these types of controls have their own objectives. So I took the XML file, this one right here specifically, and I'm going to just start, and I went ahead and just started reading through all of this. And in this video, I'll try to break things down as quickly as possible. So to dive right in here, the first thing they say is an organization will need a formal, documented access control policy that addresses purpose, scope, roles, responsibilities, management commitment, coordination among organizational entities, and compliance. Then they put a semicolon and say, and formal documented procedures to facilitate the implementation of the access control policy and associated access controls. It's just so poorly written, it's not prose. I know it's an XML document. However, it makes sense that every organization, whether it's working with the government or not, should probably have this access control policy. They go on to say that the policy and procedures are consistent with applicable federal laws, executive orders, directives, policies, regulations, standards, and guidance. So this policy sure has a lot of masters. So that's not much of a sentence there, but this second part is interesting. Apparently we need two documents, formal documents, one that talks about access and one that's talking about the implementation of such access policies. Now one thing I like to do when I come across these two-letter acronyms is just Control F. Now I don't know what PM stands for, so I thought I could Control F my way into that answer, but that didn't work. Now inside this XML document, there's going to be a lot of repetitive things here. All of this basically says all of what's over here. But once the document starts digging into the details, we walk away with some pretty good things here. Like here it says the organization defines the frequency of access control policy reviews and updates. So that's kind of funny. First day on the job, what if you were to say, so when do we review your policies? Apparently, if we're following NIST, you're supposed to have a date. Well, maybe not a specific date, but you should have a defined frequency of when the policy will be reviewed or updated. As you're reading through this, there's just so many repetitive things like right here. So I tried to use this blue color to just point out the words that are the only difference between one sentence and the next. Here it says the organization reviews, updates access control policy in accordance with organizational defined frequency. Then they go on to say the organization defines a frequency of access control procedures, reviews, updates. I'm like, what? Isn't that the same thing it just said? But focusing on the difference, okay, so you define the frequency. Now thinking about this, I wonder what's an industry norm in terms of frequency. And then I wonder what's a norm between different sectors and any one particular industry. Well, later on, they continue to say the same thing in different words, but this time it's going to say procedures. You're going to review and update access control procedures. I really thought that was the exact same sentence as the one above it for a second, but okay, there's a difference between the word policy and the word procedure. Policy right there, procedure right there. So let's skip past that part though, that's not a sentence, and look at this. I like numbered lists. It says the organization manages information system accounts, including identifying account types, so we can have individual ones, group, system accounts, accounts for certain applications, etc. Alright, so if it's the organization that's managing information system accounts, not only will they have these different account types, but they will have established conditions for a group membership type account. They will identify authorized users of the information system and specifying access privileges. So in my mind, this might be a separate table from the previous item, but one with the first item, that is account types, as a field. So I'm imagining this as a database now more than just a formal document. Number 4 talks about requiring appropriate approvals for requests to established accounts. So your access policy has to have a person to approve certain types of accounts. That's all right. It's paperwork, but the understandable kind. All for the sake of security, so that's good. Your organization will need to detail how to establish, activate, modify, disable, and remove accounts. Then my favorite thing, monitoring. So specifically, how will authorization and monitoring of these anonymous and temporary accounts, how would that work? Now for the last 4 of these, they're pretty straightforward, so I'm going to go ahead and skip them. Here, the identification of authorized users of the information system needs to have a specified level of privileges consistent with the security controls in the security plan. I like this next part. Users requiring administrative privileges on information system accounts receive additional scrutiny by organizational officials. So I'm just wondering exactly what does scrutiny mean here. Next thing I want to point out is the organization employs automated mechanisms to support the management of information system accounts. That makes sense. And I think that's what NIST Special Publication 800-53 is all about. So here's a good example right here of automation. The information system should automatically terminate temporary and emergency accounts. And I've never heard of an emergency account before, so that's something for me to be on the lookout for in the future. I did some Googling research, but didn't come up with anything. So for something to be automatically terminated, you would need to do this. Define the time period for each temporary account. Oh, and just in case you didn't believe me, my Google Food didn't help. I've also been using DuckDuckGo recently, and I still couldn't find anything about emergency accounts. Well, here's some more information about automation. If an account is inactive, NIST here suggests you disable such an account. So the question is, how long is inactive? So like many things here, you're seeing a pattern. Next, after it tells us that something needs to be done, given a time period, then it tells us here, you'll have to define that time period. That'd be nice if there was a tool like Clippy and whatever software people use. And I say that because I know this is a laborious task to define these and establish all of these automation things, but good news is it's automated. Once it's done, you should be pretty good to go. And so look, that's why I put this picture of the sloth from Zootopia, because in order to know how long something's been inactive, or an account has been inactive, you would need the last login date in order to do that. We're on page 5 of 360 so far. The next thing I want to point out is the organization requires that users log out when they expect a certain level of inactivity, and you'll need to document a description of what that's like. Organizations should determine normal time of day and duration usage of those accounts. They should be automatically monitoring for atypical usage of the accounts. I imagine people shouldn't be logging in when they're on their day off. Maybe that's atypical. However the organization wants to define atypical, you can do that in the configuration settings. And I like what they're saying right here. So while user identities remain relatively constant over time, user privileges may change more frequently based on the ongoing mission or business requirements and operational needs of the organization. So that kind of reminded me of this IG-11 robot here. It may be the same bot, but its mission had changed. Users will probably still use the same login credentials, but the roles have changed. And so that's why they say here the information system dynamically manages user privileges and associated access authorizations. So now we're getting pretty deep into the user section of access control. And there's several ways to determine what privileges a user has. Here they're talking about a role-based model, which is funny because I taught that at the high school level for a cybersecurity class. And let me read right here because this is pretty good. It's a summary pretty much of everything we've read so far. The organization manages information system accounts, including identifying account types, establishing conditions for group membership, identifying authorized users of the information system, and specifying access privileges. Then requiring appropriate approvals for requests to establish accounts, establishing, activating, modifying, disabling, removing accounts, specifically authorizing and monitoring the use of guest or anonymous and temporary accounts, notifying account managers when temporary accounts are no longer required and when information system users are terminated, transferred, or information system usage or need to share changes. And this is interesting. They note that there's this intended system usage. Your users should probably be aware of what that is. And here they kind of get into that. So access control policy procedures addressing account management, security plan, list of active system accounts along with the name of the individual associated with each account, list of guests anonymous. See, these are not sentences. So I'll just tell you this whole section right here is all about lists that the organization should have. Here they start to talk about access enforcement. I think of enforcement and I think of the police, so P1 probably though is for procedures. I like that they spell out that there needs to be logical access to a system. But what if the policy is illogical? I need to read policies to better identify if that ever happens. In this section, they're going to go ahead and get into those different access control policies. Like I was saying before with the role-based one, there's an attribute-based policy. But then right here, they start talking about access enforcement mechanisms, such as those access control lists, access control matrices, cryptography. Okay, I suppose that's a type of access enforcement. Now, in addition to enforcing authorized access at the information system level, access enforcement mechanisms are employed at the application level. That's good security. They get over the first hurdle of getting into the system, now they'll need to get over another hurdle to use an application on that system. This one right here gets really tricky though when we're talking about automated mechanisms in the event of emergencies or other serious events. This is an understandable need, but I feel like a weakness in the armor of the security posture. If bad guys know about this, they create a scenario where the emergency mechanism is triggered, and now that the system is weaker, that's when they do their attack. I suppose that's just something to be aware of. Here they start talking about cryptography as in FIPS, and I found it interesting, based on the classification level, could determine the type of cryptography being used. Moving into this next section, for the first time we see the word withdrawn. I wonder how often that appears. I wonder exactly what does that mean. Is it saying the last section or the next section is withdrawn and thus incorporated into Access Control-6? Whatever it means, at this time we're going to go ahead and get into dual authorization. I always think of those two key terminals in the show Stranger Things, where you need two people to turn the key at once to get the drill or to get the thing, whatever it is, to work. Maybe the nuclear missile to launch. And look at this sentence. It's a really strange one. It says the organization does not employ dual authorization mechanisms when an immediate response is necessary to ensure public and environmental safety. I'm thinking somebody put this sentence in because of some sort of historical context that I'm missing. What happened to make them write that sentence and put it in there? I'm really curious, and this section doesn't give or shine any light onto that. But by the time we get down here, they start talking about attribute-based access control, which makes sense. Oh, another type you can have is mandatory access control, MAC, and originator-controlled access control. So, starting with MAC, because it came second in the list, this policy establishes coverage over all subjects and objects under its control to ensure that each user receives only that information to which the user is authorized access based on classification of the information and on user clearance and formal access authorization. So that part's repetitive. As you read on, the term Bell LaPadula, well, this model is an interesting one. So here we have a picture. Pictures help me learn everything. So apparently this is just called the Bell Lapudula. So that falls in the mandatory access control policy. Here we'll have a role-based access control. Access to resources is restricted to users who have been authorized to assume the associated rule. To better wrap your mind around this whole discretionary access control, there are pros and cons to it. I mean, it's easy to implement, great flexibility, it's built into most operating systems, but the con is it doesn't scale well. There's a possibility of an access control list explosion. Many people may have too much access, and it's just prone to mistakes. Maybe a picture like this will kind of help you wrap your mind around the DAC, or discretionary access policy, control policy, sorry. Kind of feels like a free-for-all compared to the RBAC. I found this sentence interesting. It includes or excludes access to the granularity of a single user. So, how much can one user know about other users? We're getting to the end of this video. I thought this was interesting. Security relevant information is any information within the information system that can potentially impact the operation of security functions in a manner that could result in failure to enforce a system security policy or maintain isolation of code and data. So we're in the section where they're talking about hiding security relevant information. And for me, I think we should have one of these phrases like Steve Gibson is famous for saying, trust no one, or TNO. We should have something like, everything is relevant security information, so hide it all. Sometimes you don't know what information could be useful to the attackers. So when you can, go ahead and just hide it. So that was cool to see the term security relevant information. But now here, what's not cool is they say that the organization defines a security relevant information to which the information system prevents access except during secure non-operable system states. Am I reading this right? Are they saying that at a time of maintenance or when the system's down, access is now not being prevented? That just can't be true, and I just don't know why they would put a sentence like that, or the next few sentences in here, where the takeaway is basically there's a prevention of access except during secure, non-operable system states. It says secure, so it's still being prevented. Why is the word except there? Well, at least we end on a duh moment here. They say the use of encryption by the organization reduces the probability of unauthorized disclosure of information and can also detect unauthorized changes to information. Removing information from online storage to offline storage eliminates the possibility of individuals gaining unauthorized access via a network. And so I say, though, let's still keep data at rest encrypted. Even if it's not on a network, let's still keep it encrypted as well. So that's my parting words here in this first video. I don't know how many more of these I'll do. There's just so many pages. There's just so many controls and objectives to those controls. But reading through this is helping me out.